Is it possible to truly understand madness without ever having felt the primal scream bubbling beneath your skin? Did the scent of evergreen and burning fireworks ever trigger a forgotten instinct, a yearning for chaos and a release from the suffocating order of polite society? Let's dive into a world where the respectable masked revelry of Nuremberg bled into something far darker, something utterly, terrifyingly real. Imagine a city gripped by an annual fever. Not a sickness of the body, but a sickness of the soul. Every year, as the days shortened and the air grew crisp, a peculiar phenomenon gripped Nuremberg, the Furor Teutonicus, a riot of noise, mayhem, and unsettlingly authentic spectacle. It wasn't a planned festival, not exactly. It was an eruption. The church, with its pronouncements of piety and its attempts to tame the darker corners of human nature, hadn't succeeded. The yearly fits of this furor persisted, a stubborn reminder that beneath the veneer of civilization lurked something ancient, something wild, and the key to this chaos, the mask. It began with the raw Kleider, rough, shaggy cloths hastily sewn together. These weren't costumes for a play, they were shells, attempting to contain a force far too powerful for polite fabrics. The first iteration was simple, a tuft of fur, a crude mask, and a burning desire to disrupt. But the mummers, these masked figures, quickly evolved. They weren't just mimicking savagery, they became it. Think of it, bundles of evergreen, meticulously crafted to hold miniature fireworks, tiny explosions of light and noise, meant to scatter the crowds and protect the butcher's dance, a bizarre, early form of street carnival. Bells sewn onto waists clanged with every step, a relentless, jarring rhythm that seemed to vibrate through the very cobblestones. But the bells, they weren't just bells. They were the mark of demons, a chilling echo of rituals practiced across Europe. The wild men were at the heart of it all. These weren't delicate theatrical characters, they were something else. Imagine men and women covered in coarse hair, their faces hidden behind grotesque masks, their bodies adorned with pine cones, dice, and even chestnuts. They weren't trying to be wild, they were wild, distilled into a terrifyingly physical form. The Nuremberg Carnival in its conventional form featured these bearded, hairy figures, a somewhat tame version of the primal force. But alongside them lurked something far more unsettling, demons. Not the elegant, winged devils of religious art, but hulking, fur-clad creatures, mirroring the wild men in their shagginess. Storks, pigs, and even goats, all rendered in animal masks and draped in furs, creating a disturbing menagerie of monstrous imitation. It was fascinating, wasn't it, how these creatures seemed to bleed into each other. The line between demon and wild man blurred, suggesting that the boundary between humanity and the untamed was thinner than anyone realized. And the mummers weren't just performers, they were, in a strange way, law enforcement. Police orders specifically targeted the wild men, blaming them for disturbances of the peace. It was as if the masks themselves were a license to be chaotic, a permission slip to unleash primal fury. They carried sheaves of evergreen, not as decoration, but as weapons, miniature guns loaded with fireworks, meant to keep the crowds at bay. The English, with their elaborate pageants, understood this role perfectly. In Chester's St. George's procession, men dressed as ivy with black hair and beards wielded clubs and fireworks, pushing back the crowds. It wasn't just entertainment, it was control. But the wild man wasn't just about brute force, he was about presence. When fireworks weren't available, he relied on his appearance, his terrifying countenance, and, if necessary, his strong arm and club to maintain order. You could still see him doing this today in Telfs, Austria, playing the role of the sexton in a church play, or guarding the Corpus Christi processions in Barcelona, a formidable wall of fur and fury. And the variations on the wild man were endless. The Pleitslemanli in Switzerland wore rags, the Flecklejuan patched garments, the Hinsel sported fringed suits and cowbells. These weren't just costumes, they were attempts to capture the essence of wildness, to embody the untamed spirit. Then there were the Schuttigs in Elzach, resembling bears with human faces, their roar a chilling imitation of the animal they mirrored. But the wild man's story doesn't end in Nuremberg. It echoes across Europe, manifesting in different forms. In France, it was known as Hellekin, a demon of the dead, a harbinger of chaos and destruction. He pulled trees from the ground like lances, engaged in monstrous tournaments, and according to Sebastian Frank, set entire towns ablaze. The French, obsessed with theology, had largely banished Orcus, the Roman predecessor of Hellekin, but the demon lingered, a dark shadow in the corners of the imagination. And what about the ladies? The tapestry from Notre Dame de Nantes reveals a fascinating shift. The ladies of the court, initially hesitant to participate, demanded a more refined version of the wild man dance. They traded their masks for elegant gowns, but the underlying energy remained a rebellious spirit, a desire to embrace the chaos. But even this evolution couldn't completely tame the beast. In 1392, a disastrous charivari at court resulted in the deaths of 4 revelers when a torch ignited the costumes. The king, shaken by the event, retreated from the festivities, a stark reminder that the wild man couldn't be contained, only momentarily subdued. The charivari, a tradition of noisy serenades and disruptive performances, continued throughout the Middle Ages, often featuring masked figures dressed in animal skins, mimicking the wild man's shagginess. It was a way to unleash pent-up emotions, to challenge social norms, and to revel in the darkness within. And the tradition persisted, evolving and adapting over centuries. In England, mummers in fringed costumes visited houses at Christmas, performing a violent play that mirrored the wild man's primal instincts. So what was it about these masked figures, these wild men, that resonated so deeply with people? Was it a release from the constraints of civilized life? A confrontation with the darker aspects of the human psyche? Or perhaps simply a way to acknowledge the wildness that still flickered within us all? Could a single, chaotic night truly reveal the hidden depths of the soul? Or would the echoes of the wild man's fury forever haunt the edges of our carefully constructed world? Do you think the urge to embrace chaos, to momentarily shed the constraints of society, is a fundamental part of the human experience or simply a dangerous indulgence?